You know Russell Westbrook don't have the temperament to put up with that. Come on, y'all. That ain't who he is.
Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back after Russell Westbrook was left sitting in free agency, clowning the former MVP in a way fans are calling flat-out brutal. But here's the thing. What he said isn't just jokes. It hints at a deeper fallout between Westbrook and the league itself. And the truth about why Russ is still unsigned might be far messier than anyone's admitting. Let's get into it. The clowning herd around the NBA. Russell Westbrook, once the walking triple-double, the relentless Energizer Bunny of the NBA, is now sitting in basketball purgatory. The man who used to dominate highlight reels with sheer force of will is in 2025 unemployed in basketball terms. And Stephen A. Smith, never shy to put a spotlight on NBA dysfunction, has gone all in on clowning him, not with sympathy, not with sugar-coated excuses, but with the kind of raw public criticism that makes headlines and divides fan bases overnight. This isn't just a story about one player's decline. It's about what happens when an NBA icon refuses to adapt, when the league he wants to find decides to move on without him, and when one of the most powerful voices in sports media takes the gloves off. Because the way Stephen A. dragged Westbrook tells us as much about the NBA machine as it does about Brody himself. Let's not waste time. Here's how Stephen A. opened his assault.
Inexcusable behavior, that's what I saw. And I don't know why this isn't being talked about enough, to be quite honest with you.
Inexcusable. That's not a word tossed lightly on national television. For a player of Westbrook's stature, a former MVP, to be framed in those terms is a public shaming. And Stephen A. didn't stop there. He flat out said he believed Westbrook deserved to be suspended after a reckless playoff performance, labeling it appalling and inexcusable. But here's the shocking part. For years, analysts and fans whispered that Russ was a liability, that his style didn't fit the modern NBA. Now Stephen A. was amplifying it on the loudest platform in basketball media, and he went a step further, making the chilling prediction that if Westbrook couldn't take a lesser role, he could actually be without a job next year. Think about that. From MVP to unemployed. From nightly SportsCenter top 10 to being clowned as a free agent no one wants to touch. So how did we get here? How did the same Russell Westbrook, the man who once averaged a triple-double across 3 straight seasons, who forced his way into the Hall of Fame conversation through sheer willpower, end up on the receiving end of Stephen A.'s ridicule? To answer that, we have to rewind, because Russ wasn't supposed to be here. He was the kid who nearly went to Stanford for academics. Basketball was plan B. This wasn't a man destined only for the hardwood, but once he got there, he took it personal, and for a while that fire carried him.
My parents always told me, you need to get a good education. And I was actually thinking about going to Stanford just for academics, out of high school.
His teammates, legends, even rivals praised him as one of the hardest players they had ever seen. James Harden himself admitted that Westbrook's MVP season was perhaps the greatest single-season performance we ever seen. Other legends compared his fire to Michael Jordan, his relentlessness to Kobe. But here's the tragic twist. That same unrelenting style that made him feared is exactly what the modern NBA has turned against. Teams stopped guarding him. Opponents begged him to shoot. Colin Cowherd noted that Westbrook had become the least guarded guard in the league, with defenses literally stepping back and daring him to fire away. It's one thing for a role player to be ignored, but for a former MVP, that's humiliation. That's basketball's version of exile. And Stephen A. knew it. That's why he didn't just criticize Russ's game. He ridiculed his stubbornness, his inability to change.
Russell Westbrook can't change. He's not going to be a good defender. He hasn't been the last 14 years, and that's not changing.
This wasn't about missing shots. It was about the NBA's most infamous flaw, the refusal to adapt. When Russ was younger, his athleticism made up for it. But now every flaw is magnified. Every gamble, every turnover, every ill-timed jump pass becomes fuel for critics. And critics didn't stop at the court. Often Russ's very name was dragged through the mud. The Westbrook chants grew so loud his family stopped attending games.
Honestly, I was, me and my wife was at teacher-parent conference for my son. And the teacher told me, she's like, Noah, he's so proud of his last name. He writes it everywhere. He writes it on everything. He tells everybody, he walks around and says, I'm Westbrook, that's his last name. And I kind of sat there in shock, and it hit me like, damn, like, I can no longer allow people, for example, Westbrook to me is now shaming, like it's shaming my name, it's my legacy for my kids.
That's not just heckler. That's psychological warfare. And when Westbrook finally broke his silence on how deeply it cut him, the world saw the human cost of his decline. So imagine sitting at home already carrying that weight, and then turning on ESPN to hear Stephen A. saying, you might not even have a job next season. That's not analysis. That's public execution. And it worked, because here we are still talking about it. But here's the bombshell you're not ready for. Stephen A. didn't just go after Russ, he put LeBron James on blast. He accused LeBron of contributing to the cynicism around Westbrook, even pointing back to the Houston playoff days when LeBron's Lakers mocked Russ as a liability.
LeBron is guilty of that. Remember when Russell Westbrook was in Houston and they were in the playoffs against the Lakers? And LeBron James and the Lakers was talking about he with us when he had the ball?
Think about that betrayal. One of the greatest players in NBA history, the man who vouched for Russ joining the Lakers, mocked him behind the scenes. And then when things went bad, let rumors of replacing him with Kyrie swirl all off-season. So now the question isn't just whether Russ deserves a roster spot. It's whether the entire NBA machine, from stars to analysts to fans, built him up only to tear him down. And the most shocking part, we're just getting started. Because what Stephen A. hinted at, Russ being left jobless, is the darkest irony in NBA history. A man who gave everything to the game, clowned on national TV, ridiculed by fans, and now standing on the edge of irrelevance. The real question isn't whether Westbrook failed, it's whether the NBA failed him. The thing about Westbrook is that he was never supposed to be the punchline. When he came into the league, he wasn't hyped like LeBron, wasn't billed as the next Jordan, wasn't handed the keys to a franchise on draft night. He was raw, undersized for a two-guard and too wild for a point guard. But what he did have was unshakable belief. That belief became his brand. The same single-mindedness that made UCLA coaches scratch their heads turned into a Hall of Fame resume. 4 seasons averaging a triple-double. That's not just numbers. That's rewriting basketball history. Legends like Oscar Robertson had to watch the impossible become reality. Westbrook wasn't just playing basketball. He was making defiance an art form. But there's a cruel irony here. The very thing that lifted Russ to greatness, his refusal to bend, his refusal to change for anyone, is now what analysts like Stephen A. is destroying him. Magic Johnson said it himself. You have to own your stuff. You can't just blame the fans, the media, or teammates. And for all of Westbrook's fire, accountability has never been his strongest weapon. Think about how the game has evolved. The NBA of 2025 is built on spacing, efficiency, and threes. Meanwhile, Stephen A. hammered this exact point. Russ has never been a good shooter.
This is only about your game. You have not been a good shooter. And a person who has not been a good shooter.
That's not opinion. That's cold hard truth. And in a league obsessed with advanced stats, Russ's inefficiency became unforgivable. Where once he could mask it by flying past defenders, now his missed jumpers feel like turnovers. Yet here's where the story cuts deeper. Because it's not just about percentages, it's about perception. When defenses literally back away from you, the humiliation echoes louder than any box score. Imagine being a future Hall of Famer and watching defenders treat you like you're invisible. That's not just a tactical adjustment. It's basketball's version of exile. And Russ felt it. That's why his frustration boiled over into emotional press conferences. Like when he addressed the Westbrook chants, he admitted that the nickname was no longer just about him. It was hurting his family, even his kids.
I can no longer allow people, for example, Westbrook to me is now shaming. Like, it's shaming my name, it's my legacy for my kids.
That's devastating. We're not just talking about missed shots anymore. We're talking about a man's identity being mocked publicly, until his children can't even enjoy their father's career without hearing insults in the stands. And yet, when Stephen A. had the chance to soften, to show sympathy, he doubled down. He called Westbrook's antics appalling. He accused him of failing his team when it mattered most. And he flat out mocked the idea that Russ could reinvent himself as a role player.
The problem with Russ on the defensive end is his mental mistakes. He doesn't pay attention off the ball. He gambles way too much. He goes for steals constantly.
And for Stephen A., this wasn't about hating Russ. This was about telling the basketball world a brutal truth. The game had passed him by, and if Russ didn't adapt, he wouldn't just fade. He'd be erased. But here's the twist. Not everyone agreed. Legends who played with or against Westbrook still defended. Former stars like Tracy McGrady and Chandy Billups called him a once-in-a-generation competitor. Teammates from OKC to Washington vouched for him as one of the best locker room guys they'd ever had. Some even compared his fire to Michael Jordan's competitive nature. So why the disconnect? Why do players still ride for Russ while analysts roast him alive? The answer is perspective. Teammates see the work, the energy, the daily grind. Analysts see the missed shots, the turnovers, the losses. And fans, they see the memes. They hear Westbrook. They watch YouTube compilations of bad plays looped endlessly, and perception becomes reality. Which brings us back to Stephen A. Because whether you agree with him or not, his platform shapes the narrative. When he says Russ might be out of a job, he's not just analyzing. He's writing the obituary of Westbrook's career in real time. And in the NBA, perception often becomes prophecy. But here's where things get truly explosive. Because Stephen A. didn't just clown Russ. He called out LeBron James, accusing him of being part of the problem. That's betrayal at the highest level. LeBron, The same superstar who vouched for Westbrook joining the Lakers, who publicly defended him on Twitter, was being accused of undermining him all along. And when Kyrie Irving trade rumors swirled the following summer, it only reinforced the perception that Russ was disposable, even to the king. So let's be clear, this isn't just a story about Westbrook being a free agent. It's about the politics of the NBA, about how stars protect their legacy at the expense of others, about how the media amplifies every flaw until a player becomes unrecognizable. And it's about what happens when a man who built his entire identity on defiance has no one left to defy. Because here's the gut punch. Stephen A's prediction has come true. Russ is still a free agent. Teams have moved on. The game has shifted. And for all the passion, all the history, all the blood and sweat he left on the floor, the league has essentially said, we're done. So when Stephen A clowns him, it's not just entertainment. It's the sound of a door closing. It's the NBA telling one of its fiercest warriors, thank you for your service, but we don't need you anymore. And that is why this matters. Because Russell Westbrook isn't just any player. He's a cautionary tale for every star who thinks their athleticism will last forever. Every icon who thinks their willpower alone can fight time. Stephen A. Smith didn't just clown Russ. He exposed the brutal truth about the NBA. Loyalty is conditional. Greatness is temporary. And once the game decides you're done, it doesn't matter who you were. You can be clowned, ridiculed, and left behind. Respect versus ridicule. The hypocrisy of the NBA. The humiliation of being unsigned isn't just about contracts. It's about symbolism. When an MVP caliber player sits idle in free agency, the message is loud. You're no longer wanted. And that's what cuts the deepest for Russell Westbrook. Because for over a decade, teams didn't just want him. They needed him. He was the spark, the motor, the storm that kept franchises alive. Oklahoma City, Washington, Houston, even the Lakers. Every team gambled on him because they believed he could change the trajectory of their season. And for stretches he did. But now, with every passing day of free agency, Westbrook's career looks less like a chapter in progress and more like a book closing in slow motion. Stephen A knew it and he weaponized it. On live television, he didn't just critique Russ's play. He called out the behavior.
Inexcusable behavior, that's what I saw. And I don't know why this isn't being talked about enough, to be quite honest with you.
Inexcusable. Think about that word. It's not about missed shots or defensive lapses. It's about accountability. It's about saying Westbrook has crossed a line that effort alone can't defend. And when Stephen A says that on NBA Countdown, it's not just his opinion. It's the narrative that ripples across every debate show, every podcast, every YouTube highlight. But here's where the hypocrisy starts. Because while Stephen A paints Russ as appalling on the court, some of the game's most respected voices have painted the exact opposite picture off the court. Teammates describe Russ as one of the best locker room leaders they've ever had. Young players have shared stories of Westbrook empowering them, demanding they step into their greatness, even giving motivational speeches in practice that sounded more like sermons than pep talks. But what sells on ESPN? What goes viral? Not mentorship, not sacrifice. It's the low lightses, the bricks, the turnovers, the awkward airballs that fans stitch into endless TikToks. And the most painful part, Russ admitted that it hit his family harder than it hit him. His wife Nina exposed the harassment they endured. And Russ himself finally broke when he realized his son was proud of the Westbrook name, only for fans to turn it into an insult.
She's like, Noah, he's so proud of his last name. He writes it everywhere. He writes it on everything. He tells everybody he walks around and says, I'm Westbrook, that's the last name. And I kind of sat there in shock, and it hit me like, damn, like I can no longer allow people, for example, Westbrook to me is now shaming, like it's shaming my name, it's my legacy for my kids.
That's not sports banter anymore. That's humiliation crossing into family life. And if you thought Stephen A might tread carefully in that minefield, think again. He doubled down, accusing Westbrook of refusing to evolve, calling him a man who simply can't change.
Russell Westbrook can't change. He's not going to be a good defender. He hasn't been the last 14 years, and that's not changing.
This is where the expose turns brutal, because it's not just Stephen A clowning Westbrook's current state. It's Stephen A essentially declaring his career over. That's the power of narrative. But to really understand how devastating this is, you have to remember who Russ was. For a stretch, Westbrook wasn't just a star, he was the star. James Harden himself admitted that Westbrook's MVP year might have been the greatest single-season performance we ever seen. Tracy McGrady once said he had never seen anyone leave more of themselves on the court every single night. And players like Damian Lillard described him as the ultimate competitor. A man who played every game like it was his last. Even opponents who clashed with him admitted that Westbrook's relentless energy was infectious. Some called him the Energizer Bunny of the league. Others compared his competitive fire directly to Michael Jordan's ruthless mentality. But fast forward to today, and the same qualities that made him great, stubbornness, raw aggression, refusal to compromise, have become liabilities. Defenses no longer fear him. Coaches no longer build systems around him, and front offices, they don't want the drama. Colin Cowherd broke it down coldly. Westbrook is the least guarded guard in the NBA. Teams literally begged him to shoot. That's the kind of humiliation you can't come back from. And that humiliation didn't just live in the arena, it lived online. Memes of his bricks, Twitter threads mocking his triple-doubles as stat padding, clips of missed dunks going viral faster than his highlights ever did. In an era where perception drives reality, Westbrook wasn't just losing games, he was losing the narrative war. And Stephen A., he became the loudest general on that battlefield. When he called Russ's playoff behavior appalling, he wasn't just analyzing a moment, he was cementing a label. When he said Russ can't change, he wasn't just critiquing defense. He was writing a career obituary on national TV. But here's the cruel twist. Fans ate it up because outrage sells, laughter trends, and nothing goes viral faster than a once great player being clowned. Meanwhile, Russ was left to fight for dignity, fighting not just for a contract but for his family's respect, fighting against a nickname, Westbrook, that reduced the Hall of Fame resume to a joke, fighting against a narrative so strong that even his greatness couldn't erase it. And here's where the story explodes into hypocrisy. Because while the NBA media clowned him, his peers still vouched for him. Teammates like Bradley Beal swore by his leadership. Young players called him a role model. Legends praised his heart. But NBA front offices' silence offers none. So what does that tell you? That in today's NBA, respect in the locker room doesn't mean survival. That a man can give everything to the game, and once the narrative shifts, the league will let him rot on the free agency list. And that's why Stephen A's clowning hits so hard. Because whether he admits it or not, he's not just reporting on Westbrook's downfall. He's helping create it. His words carry weight. His takes echo into boardrooms. And when he says Russ might not have a job, GMs hear it, fans repeat it, and soon it becomes prophecy. So the bigger question becomes, did Westbrook truly fail? Or was he failed by a system that chews up players, turns them into memes, and discards them the second they no longer fit the algorithm of modern basketball? Because make no mistake, this isn't just about one man. It's about a disturbing pattern in the NBA. A pattern where stars are celebrated until they're inconvenient, then ridiculed until they're irrelevant. And Russell Westbrook, once the heartbeat of the league, has become its most high-profile casualty. From MVP to Mimi, the NBA's cold goodbye. Russell Westbrook is still a free agent. That's not a rumor. That's not speculation. That's the brutal reality staring back at him day after day as training camps roll on and rosters fill without his name. Think about the symbolism. For over a decade, Westbrook was one of the most relentless competitors the NBA had ever seen. Coaches marveled at his motor. Players compared him to Jordan and Kobe. Fans once adored his intensity, and now the phone doesn't ring. Teams scroll past his resume. His legacy, the triple-doubles, the MVP, the records, sits buried under memes and clips of bricks. Stephen A. Smith saw this coming. He warned the world with a brutal dose of honesty. If Russ couldn't take a lesser role, he might be out of the league entirely.
He can't prove this season that he could take a lesser role. What are they saying he's going to be next year, Stephen A? They're saying he possibly could actually be without a job.
Without a job. Those 4 words echoed louder than any stat line. And here we are months later watching them become reality. Stephen A. clowned him. Yes. But beneath the mockery was a prediction that now feels like prophecy. And here's what makes this expose darker than anyone expected. The NBA doesn't care. Respect from players doesn't matter. Loyalty to the game doesn't matter. Hall of Fame resume doesn't matter. If you can't shoot threes, if you can't fit into a system, if you can't adapt to the algorithms of modern basketball, you're gone. That's the story the media doesn't want to tell. But it's the one Russ is living. Because despite everything, despite the decline, despite the narrative, Russell Westbrook is not washed. He still brings energy. He still plays with a motor most 25-year-olds don't have. He still loves the game. But in the cold calculus of today's NBA, none of that is enough. Colin Cowherd broke it down. Westbrook is the least guarded guard in the league. Teams literally step back, daring him to shoot. That humiliation is the death nail because when defenses laugh at you, front officers do too. And yet, the hypocrisy is blinding. Ask the players, they'll tell you Russ is one of the greatest competitors of his generation. Damian Lillard said he never saw someone play harder every night. Kobe himself once praised his fire. Even opponents like Patrick Beverley, a man once locked in open beef with Russ, admitted he respected his relentlessness. But ask executives, silence. Ask coaches, shrugs. Ask Stephen A., clowning. That gap between respect and rejection is where Westbrook's story turns tragic. Because what the NBA is really saying is this: we respect you as a man, but not as a player. We love your legacy, but not enough to give you a roster spot. Thanks for everything. Now go home. And Russ knows it. That's why his words about his family hit so hard.
So it starts to affect my family, my wife. Even today, my mom said something about it today, and it affects them even going to games. Like I don't even want to bring my kids to the game because I don't want them to hear people calling their dad nicknames and out of their names for no reason.
That's not just a free agency story. That's a human being watching the game he loves turn his name into a curse for his children. That's legacy turned into collateral damage. And yet through it all, Stephen A. doesn't flinch. He says the things no one else will say on TV. That Russ is too stubborn to change. That his athleticism has faded. That his decision-making remains a liability. That his refusal to adapt has left him stranded. It's harsh. It's cruel. But it's also true because the NBA is a league that rewards evolution. Look at LeBron James, who shifted from slasher to playmaker to three-point threat. Look at Vince Carter, who extended his career by reinventing himself as a role player. Even Carmelo Anthony, once left for dead, clawed his way back into relevance by accepting a bench role. Westbrook, he never bent. He never compromised. And now he's paying the price. But here's the haunting part. For all the clowning, for all the mockery, for all the hot takes, Russ's story is bigger than Russ. It's about how the NBA treats its aging stars. One moment you're the face of the league. The next moment you're a meme. One moment you're MVP. The next moment you're Westbrook. And Stephen A. Smith, he's just the megaphone. He's saying out loud what the league whispers behind closed doors. Once you're no longer useful, you're disposable. So where does that leave Russ? In limbo, in exile. Waiting for a phone call that may never come. Watching as his name trends not for his highlights but for his failures. Fighting not just for a contract but for dignity. And maybe that's the cruelest irony of all. Because for years, Russell Westbrook defined himself by defiance. By refusing to back down. By refusing to change. By refusing to let anyone tell him who he was. But now for the first time, the game has told him, you're done. And no matter how much he defies it, no matter how much he believes in himself, no matter how many legends still ride for him, the league has moved on. Stephen A. Smith clowned him for still being a free agent. But the truth is that clowning was the obituary, and unless something changes, unless Russ finds a way to evolve in a way he never has before, his NBA career will end not with a farewell tour, not with a standing ovation, not with respect, but with ridicule. And maybe that's the real tragedy, because Russell Westbrook deserved better. But the NBA doesn't do sentimentality, it does survival. And in the survival game of today's league, Westbrook has been left behind. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.